Hey everyone, if you couldn't guess, we're going to be talking about FAB 2.0. And to start off, we're going to probably split this up into a few different videos because there is a decent chunk of things to talk about. And then on the flip side of that, you might be able to tell my voice is, well, a bit raspier or lower than normal. I am under the weather, so do forgive me, but we will be taking this a little bit slow. So, in terms of FAB 2.0, we're coming up to the 1 year anniversary of the changes, right? So this article was released April of 2022, and then the actual first set that was subject to the changes of FAB 2.0 Uprising, I believe, came out June 24th of 2022, meaning that this month is the 1 year anniversary of FAB 2.0 being implemented in the game. So I thought it would be a decent time to sort of reflect on what changes FAB 2.0 brought, why they were a benefit to the community, and potentially what other issues have somewhat amounted from the new style of delivery, if you will, the model that Flesh and Blood now uses in terms of its printing, because it has come a long way compared to the first 6 sets, right? So to begin with, this article covers 3 main points. Now, point 2 and point 3, or part 2 and part 3, aren't of a particular interest, right? Because they're not necessarily things that are needing discussion. Okay, part 2 covers the ongoing major commitments to competitive play, as well as better support for social and casual play. And while it could be stated, given the backlash or the current discussion around the price point of Flesh and Blood, the simple fact is Legend Story Studios has done wonders in terms of supporting casual play, social play, and of course the major commitments to the tournament scene. And I'm sure we're going to continue to see that type of investment and growth in Flesh and Blood by Legend Story Studios and James White. So to that degree, that doesn't really need any sort of discussion or reflection. It has just been all around positive. And then part 3 covers the ELO rating changes, which were essentially a way to make ranking more accessible across the global stage on the basis that certain areas had a pre-existing knowledge or an advantage towards the game since they had access to the game on an earlier setting. Then we also have the addition of signature weapons to the Living Legend status, which, while somewhat debatable whether or not this is a correct choice, I do personally think it is a great thing for the meta. Heroes, by and large, while creating their main archetype, are subject to weapons, right? Weapons and equipment are a major impact to the playstyle of any given hero. So the fact that the signature weapons are also being restricted as certain heroes reach Living Legend status is a overall positive thing. The only issue you might have with it is the fact that not all weapons aren't created equal, right? So for instance, if we were to use Luminaris as the prime example, Luminaris was a majestic. It's not a token weapon, but it is the signature weapon of Prism, and it is essentially banned with Prism attaining Living Legend status, and this is reflected in the collectability or the value of Luminaris, especially the Cold War variant, which has depreciated by a significant amount, especially in the light of looking at all the other legendaries found within Monarch, despite the necessarily inflated print numbers or price inflation, artificial price inflation that was subject to at the time. Then we also have getting rid of the unused restricted list, which by and large is fine. Banning, restricting erratas, if they're not needed in a game, that is an overall healthy thing because it means that the game is well balanced. So Legend Story Studios getting rid of it is nothing but a positive in my full belief. So what are we focusing on? Well, we're focusing on part 1, which was the biggest change brought about by FAB 2.0. And for starters, all we're going to do is reflect on it, right? We're going to read through this article together and understand why the changes were necessary and what exactly they may have caused. So to begin with, everything in this article is centered around this statement of mission, right? So Legend Story Studios and James White want to bring people together in the flesh and blood through the common language of playing great games. And what this sort of symbolizes and emphasizes is that they are trying to realign Flesh and Blood onto the player side of the spectrum, okay? Flesh and Blood, in its early days prior to FAB 2.0, was subject to a lot of speculation and investment that led to artificial inflation and overall negativity towards the first edition unlimited model. In order to correct this, this is the plan that James White and Legend Story Studios have outlined and implemented, and by and large, it has done the job. It has achieved a game focused more on the playing aspect than the collecting aspect. So then what were those actual changes? Well, it was the retiring of the first edition / unlimited model of printing. So rather than having two varieties, one including the chase cold foils, if you will, and then a accessible version in the sense of unlimited, they have now squished the two boxes into one. And while there are both positives and negatives to that model, again, in terms of this overall statement and goal, it has definitely been the correct choice. Okay, but what was the rationale behind it? Why was this deemed necessary? Well, a big thing is they want fans to be able to obtain cards and have accessibility to cards on release day. And what we were seeing was a lot of artificial inflation towards the first edition boxes, which of course were the initial medium at which the cards were being delivered when a set was first released, right? You don't have access to Unlimited till later on in the set's lifespan. Therefore, all the players were being funneled towards first edition. And this created the issue because there was a surplus in demand that a lot of people seemingly took advantage of, especially when we got the actual print numbers that were subject to the general inflation that COVID had occurred in a lot of stay-at-home hobbies, if you will. So Legend Story Studios went about coming up with a plan to sort of correct this issue and essentially move away from the negative press that this was attracting. Their main reason for this was that the ratio of printing from first edition to unlimited was no longer heavily tilted towards unlimited. What this meant was that, again, they wanted the cards to be accessible and obtainable on the release day, and as first edition was the product being released on the set's release, they were printing a larger and larger amount of first edition than what was necessarily needed on a collectible aspect, okay? So at the end of the day, first edition was occupying all the demand that the community had, and then unlimited was just this little trickle on top that wasn't necessarily needed. And if it wasn't needed, then this whole statement applies. If first edition is no longer special, then there was no point in differentiating it from unlimited. If there wasn't a select or limited volume of the chase, right, the first edition cards, cold foil cards, then what was the point of sticking with that model? So there were a few other alternatives they could have undergone. So why not release first edition and unlimited on the same day? Or perhaps even unlimited first and then come out with a premium collector's product. To that, they have this rationale in mind. They want the moment of joy when any fan, any person at all who is buying and opening Flesh and Blood can crack a cold foil legendary or fable, the real high-end chase card of the game. Okay, they want everyone to be able to experience that joy. They don't want just people buying first edition because they are collectors and then players buying unlimited because they just want access to cheap cards. They want everyone to have the possibility to open cards. They want to recapture the feelings and the sentiments a lot of people had in the youth when it comes to TCG, when the market wasn't artificially inflated with all these different variants. They wanted the high end of cards to feel special. So then the plan was implemented, right? The overall change, the big change, was that they made Legendary Fables and Cold Foils 3 times rarer than they had been, while offsetting it by increasing the pull rates of Rainbow Foil Legendaries so that players had access to the equipment that was needed, because again, Legendary equipment does really shape the meta or deck type, while still having a larger chase for the Cold Foils in terms of the Legendaries and Fables. And this overall, while a positive change in terms of what they were trying to achieve, has started to amount into somewhat of an issue, which we'll probably touch on in the next one when we go over box EVs and essentially what this change has really impacted. The other thing they went about implementing, of course, were Marvel cards. These were the other big chase item, and in themselves were a terrific idea. Altogether, FAB 2.0 was a terrific idea, and it has worked for their overall mission statement. The issue was this model was predicated around the community being skewed between collectability and playability. The issue is this model in itself has, if you will, overcorrected. The community has become heavily skewed towards the playing side of the game, and therefore a lot of the aspects of this change that's meant to keep the game collectible aren't factoring in as much as they necessarily should, creating a lot of the issues that we're sort of starting to see when it comes to collecting Flesh and Blood, when it comes to accessing cards for playing. And then, of course, the other addition was the history pack. So the history packs were going to fill the need of the unlimited edition. The whole idea, though, was to considerably limit unlimited, right? So if the history packs are fulfilling the unlimited edition role, they were going to be heavily curated and restricted, if you will, in terms of a timing sense. They come out later in the life cycle of the sets that they cover. So in this case, History Pack 1, covering Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, Crucible War, are all out of print, allowing this to serve the purpose of continuing to supply the market as the player community grows with the cards from those sets that are vital to play. This in itself, the History Pack, does have its own flaws, and essentially that's what we're going to split up the next few videos into. We're going to discuss this overall change to the pull rates of Legendary Foils and Fables in terms of the cold foils, and what it has essentially done to EVs and incentive to opening boxes. Then, of course, the lack of the ability for Marvels to occupy the same niche or the same collectible nature as the Legendary Cold Foil equipment. And then the role that the History Packs are meant to fill but aren't able to. And then probably just a quick summation of everything that I'm trying to discuss in these videos. So again, I will apologize. This is more of just an introductory video, right? I do want to just release them all back to back, so you shouldn't have to wait too long. But I do think it is important that we do start to reflect on FAB 2.0, because it was a very historical thing to occur in Flesh and Blood. It was essentially Legends of Studios and James White admitting that they made a mistake when it came to First Edition and Unlimited, the big model that Flesh and Blood was based upon and presented with. And overall, I will continue to affirm that in terms of this mission, in terms of centering the community onto the playing side of Flesh and Blood, FAB 2.0 has worked beautifully.